Welcome. My name is Kay Cotan. So glad that you joined me. Today, we're going to be talking about transitions, specifically transitions for a new pastor. And a new pastor's arrival is a perfect and great opportunity for impact for laity leaders. And so let's dive right in and talk about what kind of opportunity there are and for a great impact. The agenda that we're going to be covering today will be the opportunity to see things with fresh eyes, the ownership of mission and vision and the importance of that for laity, why communication is important in the transition, how to know thyself and the importance of that, to know your community, and why relationship building is important during this time of relationship building during those transitions. Also, we're going to introduce the collaborative preparation guide and how that might be a useful tool for you during this time. So let's dive in and get started. John Wesley offered this quote, which is one of my favorite. Let me share it with you. Give me 100 preachers who fear nothing but sin and desire nothing but God, and I care not a straw whether they be clergy, men or women, or lay men or women. Such alone will shake the gates of hell and set up the kingdom of heaven on earth. Friends, what this says to me is it doesn't matter whether we're clergy or laity. What matters is that we are serving the purpose of the church, and that is that we are out making disciples of Jesus. How are we growing in our own discipleship, meaning growing more and more like Christ, and how we are becoming disciple makers in our maturation of being disciples. And so whether we are clergy or whether we are laity, we all have the responsibility of living out that purpose in the life of the church. My friend and colleague, Blake Bradford, and I wrote the book Impact, Reclaiming the Call of Lay Ministry. Why is this a season for impact? It's been a season for quite some time. We believe that Methodism was founded on a movement of laity. And in those beginning years, that movement reached millions of people. It was so effective. And we believe that it was effective because it was driven by laity. Being clergy-centric or clergy-driven would have been a finite number of people. But when we have laity, we have the opportunity to multiply that impact. Because one person reaches 2, and that 2 reaches 4, and that 4 reaches 8, and so on. And so the opportunity to reach so many more people is there when we use laity to do the ministry. And I think that's really the purpose of what ministry was always meant to be. Think how Jesus did ministry. Jesus worked with 12 people at a time, and then he sent them out to do ministry. And Wesley, our founder of Methodism, he believed that all could have impact. Just as he reported in that quote that I just read to you, all could have impact, not just clergy, but clergy and laity alike. And when we work together, the impact again can be exponential. So why is this again a season of impact? What if we were to rekindle that spark and set laity on fire once again for reaching new people for Christ? That's what our world is missing. That is what people are searching for. The rise of spiritual but not religious is again growing exponentially. People are looking for something, but because of those that are nuns and duns thinking that we're hypocritical, they're still looking, they're longing for a relationship with a higher being. But maybe the way that we have been delivering that isn't something that's appealing. So what if our laity were to have that spark and meet people where they are in the community? I think something new and exciting could happen. It's interesting when we think about the professionalization of clergy. You'll notice that as more and more professionalism, meaning credentialing, education, was placed on clergy, the fall of the movement and reaching new people began to decline. In other words, what I think happened is that as more and more professionalization was required, laity felt less and less empowered and less equipped to actually do the ministry. And so they felt that clergy were the only one equipped to actually do the ministry. And so they did less and less of it. However, this isn't a new problem. If we go back to Acts 6, we find that laity need to be empowered clear back to those times. So our hope in this resource and in our time together, that there would be a God-sized impact as it relates to our time, and more importantly, to what you do with what you've learned today and how you implement it. We hope that through the time today, that you will take back that ownership, reclaim your call to ministry, your call and your ownership of the mission. You have just as much ownership in your mission, and I would say even more ownership in the local church's purpose in making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. You see, because you as laity are the local residents, the local citizens. You know your local context, your local mission field, your local neighbors much better than your clergy, because your clergy move in and out, right? We are in the appointment system. So they're called to come and serve your community. And then after a few years, the bishop may appoint a new person. But we, the congregation, the laity, are there continuously. And so we need to take that ownership of being the ones to take care of our mission field, our neighbors, and to know them and to understand our context. We don't need to be leaving that sole responsibility up to our pastor. So friends, this is indeed a ripe season for impact. And I invite you, I challenge you to accept this challenge and invite you to impact your community and your church to reach new people for Christ. Specifically, in the book, we had 8 different areas for impact, but we're going to talk about only one area of impact in our time today, because I think not only is this the time of year for that, but there are some unique opportunities specifically for a new pastor's arrival. You know, we call it a new appointment, generally happens around July 1st. And on average, it's about every 4 years that a church receives a new pastor. Now, some of you, that happens more frequently and some of you less frequently, but on average, that's about how often our churches as United Methodist receive a new pastor. What opportunity does that bring for a congregation? I know sometimes we're sad to see a pastor that we have deep relationships go, but I also want to open our eyes to the power and the opportunity in that as well. We're able to see through the eyes of someone new, a new pastor, what are things that maybe we have become blind to. So we can see fresh eyes that maybe something that we have forgotten or something that we've gotten so used to that we don't pay attention to anymore. It's a new opportunity for us to look at our ownership or taking responsibility, if you will, of our mission and our vision. It's a new opportunity for us to think about communication in a new way, because there's a new person that is becoming involved in the leadership of our church. And so how are we taking communication to a new level? How are we going to tell our new pastor about who we are as a congregation? And then how are we going to tell our new pastor about who we are as a community and to bring them on board as quickly as possible? And how do we help build relationships individually with our pastor, as a congregation with our pastor, and then help our pastor build relationships with the community as well? So let's take each one of these individually. Fresh eyes. Fresh eyes help us see through the pastor's eyes, new eyes that are laid on our context. Through the pastor's eyes, we have this opportunity to examine things newly, especially if maybe it's been more than that average 4 years. It's an opportunity for us to dive back in to see things through their eyes. Maybe they're going to say, you know what? I walked through this building, and as a new person, I would have found it very difficult without you leading me through the building, to find that nursery space. We'd never thought about that. Or there were no signs to help find the restrooms. Or, did you all notice that bush has grown up so much that sign that says guest parking, you can no longer see it? You see, it grew so slowly, we didn't even realize that it is now covered up that sign. Or that report that used to be in our leadership packet every month, one person forgot it 1 month, and then before long, we forgot that it was ever in there. You see, slowly things evolve, and then we just forget about it. But through someone new in leadership coming, they allow us to see things with fresh eyes. We see maybe not only our church, our leaders, our congregation, but through the eyes of someone new, we can see maybe our community in a different way through the new pastor. The new pastor may say, wow, that is really interesting that school has that new addition on it. That's something unusual that I don't see very often, for example. And well, we hadn't thought about it because, it just happened again, and we just took for granted that was put on, but we didn't necessarily see that as an opportunity to reach out in a different way. But our pastor noticing that there was an addition on the building gave us pause to think about, what opportunity might we have missed because of what that new addition might have signified? Or maybe when the pastor was looking for a home in the community, through touring so much, looking at different areas for a home, they noticed a brand new plat was added to one of the subdivisions that maybe we didn't have anybody that lived in that area from our congregation, so they didn't even realize that there was that whole new plat going into one of our more established neighborhoods, for example. And the other thing that fresh eyes allows us to do is sometimes we as the congregation think that what is missional, or sometimes we even get to the point of thinking maybe it's sacred, is really just what's become our method or our tradition. Let me unpack that for a minute. In other words, we do something every year, and because we've done it that way for so long, it has become a tradition. And it has become sacred to us as a congregation, and we would not think about doing anything different. However, through fresh eyes, our pastor might challenge us a little bit to say, So help me understand how this is helping us make disciples. And so when we really unpack that to say, wow, we really have a great time. We love doing it. But, when we originally started that 25 years ago, it did help us connect with our neighbors, build relationships, and it did help people be introduced to Christ. And it did help people find a way to be engaged in the life of our church in a new way. In other words, it helped grow our church. But you know what? Now that we think about it, over the last 5 years, it has not done that whatsoever. The only people participating are those of us that are already inside the church. And so its original purpose, it no longer serves. So it's become more of a tradition. It's just a method. It's no longer what's missional. It no longer helps us serve the mission of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Now, we may still continue to do it, but now we know it has moved into the category of fellowship. It is no longer a tool to help us reach new people. So we just have to do it for different reasons. Then we have to replace what we were doing to reach new people with something new. Or if we don't have the capacity to do both, we may have to stop that so that we can have the capacity to do something new. But seeing things through fresh eyes helps us look at those things maybe that we hadn't looked at for a while. Now, let's look at the laity's ownership of mission and vision. Would you take a ride with me? I want to tell a little story that I think helps maybe unpack this point a little bit. Now, we're going to take a ride on a bus. Now, this isn't just any bus. We're going to take a ride on a luxury charter bus. Now, it has the screens and it has the headrest and the footrest. We can watch movies and do karaoke. We're going to have a great time. Now, we have been planning this trip for a really long time. Everybody knows their seat assignment, what their responsibilities are on the trip. We know exactly where we're going. We're going on a beach trip. Now, going on a beach trip, we know what we need to pack, right? We wouldn't be packing parkas and snow boots and snow skis, right? No, that wouldn't be appropriate. What we need is suntan lotion and our bathing suits and flip-flops and sunglasses, right? So we all know how to be prepared, what to pack, and we know when to show up. The itinerary has been set. We know where we're going, so we know how to program the GPS. So we all show up on the designated days with the appropriate preparations, and we climb aboard and we sit in our designated seats. And we start out on our mapped location with our GPS engaged. Now, you all know that there are going to be things that happen along the way. Are we going to hit traffic congestion? Obviously. Are we going to hit construction? If it's the summertime especially, probably so. And we might have to detour around construction. We might hit a pothole or two. There might be some bumps in the road. But does that change where we're going? Absolutely not. That is not going to take us away from our beach destination. We're going to have a great time. We're all going to, again, set in our designated spot. We're going to take care of when it was our time to lead karaoke. Or when it was our time to hand out the snacks. Now, again, this was a very nice charter bus, and it has a really great bathroom. But even with all of that, and we're Methodist, right? So we have really great snacks. There's going to be times that we're going to want to pull off into a rest area and stretch our legs and get some fresh air. And we'll do that from time to time. But when we crawl back on that bus, does that change where we sit? Nope. Does it change what our responsibilities and duties are? Nope. Does it change our beach destination? Absolutely not. None of that changes. We just get right back on the road and we continue on. But we look at the driver's seat and we realize that we have a new driver. Did that new driver decide to take us somewhere else? Nope. The GPS is programmed. We're still going to the beach. Friends, that is our appointment process in the United Methodist Church. We had a new driver. We have a new pastor. You see, too often I hear churches say, gosh, we just have to wait for our new pastor to arrive for us to be able to fill in the blank. It's like everything has to stop when we have a transition, when we have a new appointment. And sometimes new appointments are announced as early as February or March. And so we lose all of that time. And then we've got to wait for our pastor to get settled in and so on. And so sometimes we lose a half a year through these transitions. And I also hear them say, gosh, we have to wait for our pastor to cast vision or tell us where we're going or to lead us. Friends, that is not the intention of the way the church is supposed to be led. I have yet to work with a pastor that would not be thrilled to come in and just have to drive the bus. What does that mean? It means that the congregation fully understands that their mission is to make disciples, and that their vision, the unique way that God is calling their congregation to make disciples, they have discerned that, and they have programmed their GPS on how to do it. And they simply need to come in and drive, lead the way in the way that that's already been discerned. That way you don't lose any time. You don't lose any momentum. That means we have discerned and we own that discernment. And we invite our pastor in to ride along with us. So that's my challenge to us as laity, is we are collaborative partners in ministry. We don't wait for our clergy to come in and discern that for us. So remember, we're not waiting for our pastor to come in and tell us where we're going. We discern where God is calling us as a congregation to go. And we own that because it's God's calling. It's not our pastor's calling of where our church is going. This is also a great season during our pastoral changes for communication. I have yet to work with a church that in some way or another doesn't report communication as being some sort of an issue. So there's always improvement needed for communication. So here are 5 key ways that we can improve communication, especially during our time of transition. Number 1, be very transparent in the appointment process. And I would say that I would challenge this even to our clergy brothers and sisters. Sometimes clergy have asked for moves, but they will not admit that to their SPRC or their leadership boards. If they've asked for that, it's really helpful for them to share that with their congregations. If they don't share that, and then it looks like that the cabinet has moved a pastor without the congregation having asked for the pastor to move, then there's all sorts of issues of trust with the DS and with the cabinet. It's really helpful, clergy brothers and sisters, if you would just be transparent in what you feel is best for you. I know that there is confidentiality around HR issues for SPRC or leadership boards if you're in the simplified structure. But for those things that you can share, please be very transparent in that. Change, creates anxiousness in folks and certainly in organizations. So the more information that you can share, it lowers the anxiety level. Such things as, who that new person is going to be, what the transition process looks like, share dates, share, last Sundays, first Sundays, information about the families, the family of the person moving in, how they could be helpful, how they could be in prayer for them, and so on. Just anything that you can be sharing, how they could be helpful in the process, as just as transparent as you can, is always helpful. And not only keep your leadership updated, but also keep your congregation updated. And you need to do that in multiple ways. Just because you share that information on Sunday, remember, not everyone attends every Sunday. If people are attending once a month, that means that you're going to have to repeat that every Sunday for a month for everyone to have heard it once. And on average, people have to hear things 7 times before they've actually heard it. So think about how the different modes of communication you're using, of email, text, verbal, videos, and so on, so that you're getting that message out in a variety of ways. Provide information about arrival to the congregation and the pastor. They're going to be arriving, on this date. They're going to be, they would like to have help or not have help to settle in. Some pastors and families love the help. Others consider that to be a very private experience and would rather not have help. Some would like help with meals or childcare. Others would like help with unpacking boxes. It's a very individual experience. So ask them him, her, or them, what their experience and what their preferences are. Don't make any assumptions. If they're coming from a distance, sometimes, having been in that situation myself, sometimes you have to start with all new things in your refrigerator, like all of those condiments and starter foods, milk and eggs and mayonnaise and ketchup and mustard and butter. And so could you have those things available for them? What are those preferences and those brands, so that those things are already in there? So when they get up the first morning, those things are available, that they're not having to rush out that evening or the next morning to make those first meals, and paper plates because you can't find the dishes maybe when you first arrive. Just what could help them, bottled water and so on. Don't make any assumptions and let them set the routine, the preferences. There are things like providing gift cards to the favorite restaurants. Not only then they can choose how to use them and they can choose the meal on the menu that they like, but it's helping them get out in the community and meet people in the community as well. Another great communication tool is share what we call sacred bundles and traditions. You might even call them sacred cows. This is those things that are just near and dear to your congregation. Don't let them find out by accident. Just be upfront. One of the stories that my friend Blake shares in our impact book is, on that first Sunday, his first Easter. So, right, he'd already been there like 9 or 10 months at that point, but he thought he was so prepared and ready, had gotten there early on that Easter morning. And the first person walked in with a flower in their hands and said, "Where's the trellis?" And he said, "What are you talking about, the trellis?" And it's like, the trellis, we have the trellis up, up in in the chancel area, and everyone brings in flowers and they weave these flowers into the trellis every Easter morning. He's like, I didn't know. So here he was feeling all prepared, ready to go. And instead, he was frantically hunting for the trellis moments before this Easter service, and they found it, crammed in the back of a storage room. And so they were having to move stuff out of the way to get it out. And so while people were arriving, they were having to move this trellis into the sanctuary space, and then he felt flustered and sweaty, and, kind of ruined that whole feeling of being prepared, and just kind of came unraveled at that point. And so, what are those things that your pastor needs to know? What are things that are just non-negotiables that your pastor would need to know? Don't have him, trip up and fall into that pothole. Just let him know up front so that they don't have to find those by accident. That's just being gracious. And finally, over communication is very unlikely. It is really hard to over communicate. So err on the side of feeling like you're communicating too much, and likely you are communicating just enough if you're tired of communicating. The next area is know thyself. What do I mean by that? Let me give you 3 areas as an example. There's an area that we call vital signs. Those are areas of information that is reported to your annual conference. Some of those I think are more helpful than others, but at least they're touch points. And you may be developing other signs of vitality, but how are you measuring vitality for your congregation? Right now, they're usually measuring average worship attendance, professions of faith, generosity, small groups, and people in hands-on mission service kind of work. Do you know what those are? Are those trends that are growing or declining? I think some other signs might be how many new people are engaging in the life of your church. And I don't mean just worship, but are engaging in the life of your church in new ways. And that might be in a new group, serving in the community through service opportunities for the first time. And that may be the only way that they're connecting, but that's great. They're connecting to the life of the church. Another thing is, how are you multiplying leaders? And then how are you multiplying groups? So what is it that you're measuring to show your vitality? And then sharing that with your pastor. The next one is the life cycle, and that is that little box at the bottom of your screen there. This is the life cycle of a church. I challenge all the congregations that I work with to look at the life cycle stages at least once a year, likely at the strategic ministry planning retreat in the fall of either your board or your council. I believe it's important for churches to keep their eye on this and know where they're at, so they're responding in a strategic way. You can see on the left is the birth of a congregation, and on the right is a death of a congregation. Unlike people like you and me, who only have one life cycle, organizations like a church can have multiple life cycles. And I'm sure your church has probably had multiple life cycles. The idea is right up there at adulthood, you see up at the peak there, is where we would catch ourselves and create a new life cycle. If we don't create a new life cycle from adulthood, then what happens? We go over the hill, as you might say, and go into maturity, and we go into decline. If we don't at some point create a new life cycle, then the organization, the church, would die. It would close. At each of these life cycle stages, you see these letters that represent V is for vision, R is relationships, P is programs, and S is structure. Sometimes you'll see those letters represented as an uppercase and sometimes a lowercase. When it's an uppercase, that means it's a driving force. Think about it as like in the driver's seat. When it's a lowercase letter, think of it as being present, but not a driving force. In other words, think of it as in the back seat or sometimes even in the trunk. You'll notice that when it gets to death, there are letters like the V, the R, and the P that are absent completely. They have gotten out of the car and you left them back at that rest area. Now, let's look at some key factors in the life cycle. When you're growing, vision is driving. When you're in decline, structure is driving. Why is that important to understand? When a church loses vision, then we go into the structure, and when structure is driving, we're not healthy. That means we're off mission. Let me unpack that a little bit more. Now, we've talked about mission. Every church has the same mission, the same purpose, and that's the Great Commission. Jesus gave us that. And that's to go and make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world, Matthew 28. But I don't know about you, but I've been in a lot of different churches, and no two churches look alike and live out that mission in the same way. The unique way that each church lives out their mission, their purpose of making disciples, is reflected through their vision. Okay? Vision is the unique way that a congregation lives out their call of making disciples. While mission never changes, it's biblical, vision changes from time to time. It needs to, because vision is what helps us create a new life cycle. But see, what I find is that so many congregations are reluctant to go through a new visioning process. Oh, been there, done that, it didn't do anything. Because sometimes all we do is create a new vision statement, but we don't implement a strategic plan how to live into that vision. And so what happens? We lose vision and we go into decline. Now, relationships. Relationships are a key factor. Remember, when they're capitalized here on the growing side, that means that relationships are key. There's two parts of relationships: our internal relationships, those of us that are already gathered in the faith community, and our external relationships, those in our neighborhood, our mission field, those that we are taking responsibility to reach. And most of the time, the relationships of those that are already gathered take priority over the relationships that we are called to reach, the relationships of those in our neighbors. When the priority are the relationships that we have yet to build with our neighbors, we're growing. When our relationships are the priority with one another of those already gathered, we're usually in decline. Programs. Programs are what we do. We call it ministry, events. Programs are not meant to be forever and always. Programs are what we do in order for that vision, the God's preferred future for how we uniquely make disciples in a given season. The programs are what we do for that vision to become a reality. So the programs need to change from time to time. But see, sometimes we get stuck in doing the same programs over and over and over. Or sometimes we want to go back to programs that worked 20 years ago, even though our context has changed. So programs are the how, the strategy, but too often we get mired down in the tradition of programs instead of it being the strategy. And so when sometimes programs drive us instead of vision driving us. And that gets us sometimes into trouble as well. Now, structure. Structure is four different things. Structure is our building, our grounds, right? Our facility. Structure is also our calendar. Yes, our calendar is part of our structure. And how it's our structure is if we do the same thing every year. So for instance, if the third Saturday of January, we always have our annual chili supper, then probably your calendar is driving you. As opposed to, we start with a blank calendar every year, and we do things based on what do we need to be doing this year so that we live into our vision, because it's all about making disciples and maturing our existing disciples to be disciple makers. It's not based on photocopying last year's calendar and doing the same thing again this year. Another piece of structure is budget or dollars. And so if we spend a whole lot of time on, well, we can't do that, we don't have enough money, or people protecting the money that we have, instead of, we have been blessed with these dollars, and how are we leveraging these blessings in order to make disciples? What I find is so many times we have churches with large endowments, but they have become much less generous, and they hire people to do ministry for them, if at all. And they sometimes, even churches of a dozen people, have their own personal chaplain to take care of them. And there is no disciple making going on whatsoever because they have an endowment to take care of them. But the church is not living on mission. They are way down there in retirement and old age because structure is driving them, not mission. Now, the fourth and final part of structure is the way that decisions are made in the church. Are decisions made based on mission? Is everything we're doing living out the Great Commission? Or are the decisions based on personal preference, control, power? What's driving our decisions? And how many stops on the decision-making train does it take to make decisions? If we're not flexible, if we're not timely, if we're not able to respond in this kind of context, if we kick the can down the road more than we make missional decisions, then structure is driving. We know our building is driving if we spend more time talking about paint than we talk about making disciples. That gives you an idea. Okay? So if structure is driving, we're in decline. So you can see why it's important to know where we're at in the life cycle of the church life cycle, so that we know what kind of changes that need to be made. Do we need to go through a visioning process? Do we need to be more focused on exterior relationships than interior relationships? Do we need to be less program driven? Do we need to look at programs in a way that is missionally focused instead of traditionally focused, and so on? We need to know who we are, where we're at in the life cycle, and be very truthful. It's like holding the mirror up to ourselves so that we can be honest with our pastor instead of our pastor having to be the one to reflect that back to us. We know that it's time to do a visioning process when one of three things happen. A congregational call is another way to talk about your vision, right? And that's a unique way you make disciples. Each congregation has that unique call, and that vision or unique call comes from the intersection of the need of the community, the problem of the community that the congregation is going to solve, or the opportunity that, that the church is going to take care of. That's one. The second is the gifts of the congregation, the skills of the congregation. There's a uniqueness there. And then the passions of the leaders that are going to drive all of this. The intersection of those passions, needs, and gifts is where this unique calling comes from. Because if there is a need in the community, but we don't have the gifts or the passion to meet that need, then we have no business in that being our congregational call. And see, too often we try to do too many things and we just do them okay. We're better off to do fewer things and do them really well. What do we want to be known for in the community? So that's what I'm talking about, of knowing ourselves. And if we need some work around this, this is a perfect time to do it. And maybe you need a coach or a consultant to come in and help you with this. Or maybe this is a time to say to your new pastor, boy, we need some help in working with this. And we're gonna be ready for the next pastor to know ourselves better, because we're going to keep our finger on the pulse of this. The next is know your community. Okay. This first starts with demographics. First of all, I think it's important to remember that your pastor technically is not appointed to your church. Your pastor is appointed to your mission field. Your pastor is appointed to your town or your city. They're appointed to not only serve your church, but to reach new people in that area as well. And your church is called to serve that mission field. Your church isn't called just to take care of those that are already there. The purpose of the church is to make disciples. So when we talk about your mission field, it's important for you to, what I call, name and claim and take responsibility for reaching your mission field. So as leaders, have you really had that kind of conversation and discernment of what your mission field is? When you run a demographic report from Mission Insight, you have that opportunity to look and pull those reports as part of your apportionment dollars from your conference. What that means is there is a default setting that's a 2.5 or 3 mile radius. Please don't just do that, because I can guarantee you that not everyone's mission field is round, and not everyone's mission field is a 3 mile radius. A rural area is a much larger area, a much larger mission field than an urban. And a suburban area is usually a larger mission field than an urban. It depends on the density of the population. It's what's walkable in about 10 minutes, what's drivable in 10 to 15, 20 minutes tops in a rural area. Sometimes you would look at your mission field as a zip code, maybe in a more rural area or a lessly dense population. In an urban area, it may be this street to the north and south and east and west. It may be just a few block area. In another area, it might be this street to the north and south, but the railroad tracks to the east and a river to the west. It could be a school district. It could be a polygon. But it's natural boundaries of where people in the neighborhood kind of do life. So it is not just what you pull up on a report. It is the natural comings and goings of people in a given area. And it is the area in which your building sets. Your church facility was planted in that time, in that place, for you to serve first that neighborhood. And when you have reached that neighborhood, then you can move out and do a bigger demographic, a bigger mission field. But friends, as long as you've said, this is where we're at, that is your primary area to serve and to reach. Take responsibility for the souls there. I don't think that we should be in an area that we're not willing to take responsibility for reaching. If we're driving in from all different parts of another part of the city or town, and nobody lives in the neighborhood, and we're unwilling to do that work in ministry to reach the people in the neighborhood, then I'm of the mind that we need to turn the keys over to people that are willing. Then you all move to an area that you are willing to do the work of building relationships and introducing people to Christ. Now, run then the report based on the mission field parameters that you set. And then what is a particular segment? So there's like 71 different segments. And when you run those reports, then it will tell you the most densely populated of those segments. And then you can run those. And then you can also run who you all are as people of the congregation. And then there are preferences in 7 different areas, and see where those preferences are in alignment with who you all already are. See, what I find is that we want a particular demographic in our church. But when we look at the preferences of that demographic and the preferences of the existing congregation, sometimes they're in conflict with their preferences. And then we wonder why we're unable to reach them. So this gives us very practical tools in identifying where those gaps are in who we are in our preferences and who we're trying to reach in their preferences, and say, is this even going to work? Because again, friends, we cannot be all things to all people. And I know it feels counterintuitive to say, choose a niche demographic, a mosaic segment. But when we do this shotgun approach, then our message is muddled, as opposed to say, this is who we are and this is who we're trying to reach. Then that targeted approach can be heard by the very specific people that we're trying to reach. But when we are trying to be too broad, nobody hears our message and it doesn't resonate with anyone. Believe me, when churches get over that scarcity mindset, they are much more effective than when we feel like, oh, we can't do that because then we won't reach anyone. Believe me, it works. It works. So the other thing is to really know your community, not only from the reports, but I call it the walkabout information. Are you driving your mission field? Do prayer walking in your mission field? Are you driving? Do you really know? We should be, not our pastor, although I hope our pastor comes along with it, but we should be the experts. We should know what's opening and closing, what's shifting in our neighborhoods. Are there new businesses coming or going? Are there shifts in the demographics? Is there an area that was once homeowners that are now more renters? So there's more of a moving in and out in the neighborhood. Or is there socioeconomic change? Is there a business that's coming that is going to create a shift in the neighborhood? Or is there a business that's closing? So all of these things within our mission field, we should be aware of, we should be on top of, because all of those things affect the life of the church and how we should be responding to our community. And so this then pertains to our leadership, whether it's a simplified structure or our council. This is the kind of work that our councils and boards should be paying attention to, that strategic and generative work. Too often we're down into the management weeds, but this is the kind of work that we should be paying attention to so that we're responding appropriately. And that way we don't wake up one day and go, we have no idea who our neighbors are, and we're unable to be relevant and to reach them because we've lost touch. If we stay up on those kinds of things, we're less likely for that to happen. So the idea then is for us to keep up on this. And then when our pastor arrives, we're the ones that can say, this is who we are, and this is who our community is. And let us help you get acquainted, instead of saying, okay, pastor, go out there and figure out who our community is. So that leads us into intentional relationship building. And here are 5 key ways to think about doing that. First of all, I call them cottage conversations, call them whatever you'd like. Here's how I describe them. Set up groups for your pastor to meet with in homes, on back porches, in the parks, whatever is comfortable. But divide people up in groups of people that don't necessarily normally meet together. So in other words, don't just have your pastor meet with the Sunday school class that's already meeting. Not only is this an opportunity for your pastor to have conversations, but it's also a great time for your congregation to be in communication and conversation, and to hear from people that maybe they are not normally in conversation with. And so there is opportunity for different generations to hear from one another, and for different folks that don't normally hear different maybe opinions and ideas from one another. So mix people up, and don't have any more than about 10 people in a conversation if possible. Make it super easy. Don't serve big elaborate meals, maybe a dessert or a snack, that have the same maybe 5 or 6 key questions that the pastor asks. Maybe there's a little bit that the pastor shares, and have one person attend those meetings, cottage conversations with the pastor each time, and take notes. That way the pastor can collect all that information, but not have to, they can be fully present, but it can all still be collected. The same person collecting all of it, hears it all the same way, as opposed to it going through multiple different filters, if you will, of different people. But if it has to be different people, it does, just as few people as possible. Questions like, tell me what you think is the best thing about our church. Tell me what your dreams are about the church. I love the magic wand question. If you had a magic wand, it could change one thing. Anything is possible, right? It's an all-powerful magic wand. What would you change and why? There's always the introduction question. Tell me your name, your favorite ministry you're involved in. Don't ask all, because you could be there all day. Just your favorite ministry, how long you've been attending, and what service, if you have multiple services, you attend, right? But the same questions, figure out what those questions you think are important, that you ask every group, every cottage conversation the same. And then why this is important, not only for your pastor to get to know people, but then your pastor is collecting great information, and your pastor can then come back to the leaders and say, here's what I heard, your dreams, your congregation. Here's what I heard are the things that your congregation says they'd like to have changed. 60% of them said this one key thing, or 80% have a dream to do this. So not only is it getting to know and relationship building, but it's also great information. The other thing is setting up conversations with key leaders. What are that handful of key leaders that just need some one-on-one time with your new pastor, rather than your pastor trying to discern that? Because sometimes the people that show up at their door are not necessarily the ones that they should be spending their time with. So who are those people? And go on and just set those times up for them, and at least give them names so they know, or again, set those up. Who are the community and business leaders that are key for them to know? And instead of not only for them to have to find them out, but also for them to cold call to set it up, you all, as the laity, live there, you do business there, you shop there, you know these folks. So make the introduction. So call the superintendent of the school, because one of you are on the school board, or one of you are a teacher, or whatever the case may be, and say, Superintendent Smith, we have our new pastor who has arrived, and I would love to treat you to lunch and introduce you to our pastor. And so you make the introduction and you take them both to lunch. Much nicer, much more gracious to both to do something like that. So what are those key community and business leaders that you would make the introductions and be a part of that initial conversation. Again, church and community stakeholder conversations. Who are some of those that your pastor would need to know? See, this is intentional instead of your pastor just trying to figure it out on their own. And then what is your ongoing commitment for both the pastor and the congregation of being in the community? How are you showing up in the community to build relationships? And this isn't going out and serving anonymously. This isn't, sending socks or coats or green beans to the pantry. But what is your ongoing commitment to being in the community, building relationships with people so that you're building trust so that you might have the opportunity to share your faith? Remember, in our context, where we are no longer living in a world where people naturally are a part of a church or want to be a part of a church, there is not a natural desire for them to be going to worship, nor should that be our first go-to. So you wouldn't say, hey, you should be in church, or, I want to invite you to worship as a first step. Normally, you would build a relationship, you would build trust, you would give them some sort of an indication of why your faith is important to you. And then you would usually invite them to something that is a little bit more secular leaning in the life of your church, whether it's a service opportunity, it's a fellowship opportunity, it's what I call a bridge event. So it's for the sole purpose of building relationships with the unchurched rather than worship, because that's a huge leap for most people in our unchurched environment. So what are the ways that you're doing that? What's your ongoing commitment to intentional relationship building ongoing in the life of your church? Now, that's a whole lot of ways that we can be intentional. I hope that you have gotten some tips there and maybe making a list of ways that you're going to be intentional in this transitional time and have laity impact specifically through pastoral transition. I have prepared a collaborative, what I call preparation guide of preparing for and leading through these first few months in a pastoral transition. I call it the next chapter ministry. Through that, there is a time for us to think about laying all of these steps out. It's almost like a guide to help you build all of this information that we've just shared. And then it is also a guide to help you build what I call a ministry action plan, which is the next steps for here's what we learned, and then here are some things that we're going to do with all the information that we have learned. So if this is something that you think might be a tool and that you're interested in, then all you need to do is go to the place where you found this webinar. There is the website address, the URL again, and right there beside the URL where you found this webinar link, you'll find also the link to this collaborative preparation guide, and just go there and collect that. Click on that link and you'll find the link to purchase the collaborative preparation guide if that's another tool that you might find helpful to guide you through the transitional process to help you have the best impact during this time. So friends, how are you going to use and prepare for a powerfully positive impact through this pastoral transition? I do hope that you take full advantage of that, of this time, and that you are blessed during this transition. Your pastor is blessed through this transition. Your congregation is blessed as a part of this transition, and ultimately that your congregation is blessed through this transition. As this has been helpful to you, I hope that maybe you will share this with a friend or a colleague. Again, this is Kay Kotian, your coach and consultant here at U Unlimited. Thank you so much for joining me.